All right. Are you guys ready to hear about cowboys and how it relates to our lives?
Heck yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Do it.
So I'm not really a fan of Westerns or general cowboy culture, but I learned some interesting history recently, and I thought this would be a good time to share this topic and encourage you guys to look deeper into things that make you uh, think that things are factual history, and specifically on how that relates to race in our country. We know that one of America's fascinations and lore of the West were cowboys. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these faces and names of real and fictional names. So there's the Lone Ranger, Clint Eastwood, Billy the Kid, and Walker Texas Ranger, which is the one I watched a lot when I was a kid. And while this fascination with trailblazing, rodeos, and riding horses are real, it's highly unrepresentative of the real history behind cowboys. It's entirely too white. In reality, after the Civil War, about 25% of cowboys in the Wild West were Black. And some historians say that it was even higher, even before before the Civil War. But being a cowboy was one of the few jobs that were open to Black men who didn't want to be elevator operators or delivery boys or something similar to that. And they were actually in pretty high demand to be hired because they had already been doing the jobs as slaves previously and were pretty knowledgeable in the trade. So I'm going to talk through a few of the prominent figures that were cowboys, and I also wanted to touch on this, although it is not a Black man, it is someone who was known as a man. It was Little Joe Mahana, or Johanna. And so on the onset of World War II, there were a lot of female cowboys or cowgirls, and often their stories were bypassed, and there was always the double standard. But Joe owned his own farm and stock and was a cowboy for 18 to 20 years in Idaho. But it turns out that Joe was a woman and was not identified as one until her death for the majority of the community in 1904. She even voted in the 1880 Republican Party or primary, despite women not having the right to vote. So she was pretty sneaky, and I'm sure this happens more often than we know, but I thought this story was a nice one to touch on. So let's talk about some other people. There's Bass Reeves. He was the first Black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River. And before he earned that title, he was actually an escaped slave from Oklahoma, which was then Indian territory. So while he got into that territory, he learned 2 separate tribe languages and then started to learn the lay of the land there and become a cowboy. It was after the 13th Amendment that he moved back to Arkansas, and that was his home state. That's where he became to earn the title of U.S. Marshal and overall badass, I would say. While serving as Marshal, he made over 3,000 arrests. He ended up killing 14 people in self-defense, all without sustaining a single gun wound over the course of 32 years, which is pretty awesome. And during his time, he sent many fugitives to Detroit to serve time. And it was there that the Lone Ranger debuted on the radio in 1933. So it's rumored that he was the one who inspired the Lone Ranger. So that's pretty awesome. Then we have another one, Nat Love, or Nate Love. Some people have discussions over if there was actually an E or not, but he wrote it as Nat. He was actually born in Davidson County. So this is pretty to home here. He first learned to tame horses as a slave in Tennessee, and ended up being one of the best known early Black cowboys. When slavery ended, he stayed at the plantation that he was at. He ended up winning a horse at a raffle. He sold the horse back to the owner and used that money to leave town at age 16, which is pretty crazy. He ended up moving to Kansas, and that's where he started to become an expert marksman and cowboy. And despite the outlaws of Black literacy, he was taught how to read and write at an early age. And he even wrote his own autobiography titled Life and Adventures of Nat Love, better known in the cattle country as Deadwood Dick. And he was given that nickname supposedly after winning almost every contest in a rodeo in 1876. And then we have a more recent and current figure. This guy is still alive. His name's Cleo Hearn. He is half Black and half Indian. And his love for riding horses in the rodeo started at a really early age, although he was not able to participate in major rodeos due to segregation. But later, he ended up becoming the first African American to win a major calf roping event in 1970 at the Denver National Rodeo. And what's really awesome too is this guy in 1971, he and 3 other men founded the American Black Rodeo Association. And he ended up changing the name of that in 1995 to Cowboys of Color Association to include all races for the audience and for participants. So it's really awesome. And when talking about the rodeo, he said, "Let us educate you while we entertain you. Let us tell you the wonderful things that Blacks, Hispanics, and Indians did for the settling of the West that history books have left out." And that being said, there's a lot of history that has been pushed aside or disregarded. So the next time you're curious about a topic or things that you know or think is facts, dig a little bit deeper to see if you're missing something important.